I want to thank our sponsor, Planet Ford. Planet Ford has always been a proud supporter of law enforcement in the community, providing customer service and fleet management, sales, and service. If you're looking for that personal quality service, contact Planet Ford in Spring or online at planetford.com. You're listening to Crime Scene Today, where we cover current issues facing law enforcement, forensic, crime scene investigation. I'm your host, Dan Zintek. Joining me today, we have co-host Cele Rossi, Bloodstain expert, crime scene investigator. So starting off this week, I wanted to make a couple of announcements that we have. So the TDIAI, which is the Texas division of the IAI, made an announcement yesterday. They were supposed to have a conference June 16th to 20th. That has been canceled due to the COVID crisis going on, and they've decided not to have the conference this year. So next year it is going to be in Frisco, which is north of Dallas. As far as the parent organization, the IAI is still planning on having their conference as of yesterday, which is happening August 9th through August 15th in Orlando, Florida. So they're still keeping up on that. Normally, they accept registration in April. They've delayed that, just trying to get their heads wrapped around if we're going to continue with this and what we're doing. So registration at this point should start in May. That being said, and moving forward with that, there is the presentation deadline has already passed. February was the presentation deadline. However, the deadline for getting photo and poster contest in is July 31st. So if you have any posters or photos that you want to put into the contest at the IAI, then just go to theiai.org and look for the poster or photo presentation, and you can sign up and send that in. So hopefully that'll still continue, and we'll keep you up to date on that. So I brought Cele in today to talk. She's been to a couple of conferences lately. I know we just talked about that, and one question sort of to address is why to go to some of these conferences. A lot of people believe that it's to go and just spend some time, and they dismiss the value in the conferences. And I usually like to describe them that once you've obtained your basic courses, once you've obtained just the basic needs to do your job, that a conference is where you're going to find the latest information, the latest technologies and procedures, and just the latest news in your discipline. So that being said, Cele, you've been to a couple of more recent conferences. I think the last one, or I should say last one, the International Association of Bloodstain Pattern Analysts was in November?
The end of October, 1st of November.
Right, excuse me. And so you are now the president of that organization.
I am, yes, sir.
So in that, I pulled up sort of what happened in 2019 there, and just to give you an idea of different things that happen in these conferences. For one, the networking is amazing in meeting people that have the same disciplines and being able to have those conversations and also have those contacts afterwards to follow up on. But some topics that were covered just at the IABPA on the conference schedule, give you an idea of some things that go on at the conferences, latent fingerprints under blood, how they can be recovered. The head is a source of blood spatter, dynamic shooting incident, directional analysis, uncertainty of measurement, three-dimensional documentation analysis, cast-off stains, and then Cele, you had done one on understanding the accreditation. So if you could just speak a little bit as far as the IABPA and what they do and sort of what the latest thing going on and what's happening in the bloodstain world.
Sure. So the great thing about a lot of conferences, the IABPA, we just had the Crime Scene Reconstruction Conference in Reno right before all of the travel bans were getting underway. But when we were at the IABPA, it truly is amazing because, there's only so many courses, like sit in the seat courses that are offered in any kind of region. So when you get to a certain level, after you've had your introductory 40-hour class, you've had an advanced class, you've had, a level 3 class, you've had, some of your, what we would consider foundational coursework in Bloodstain, then you start getting into some really, big classes like fluid dynamics, math and physics as it relates to bloodstain pattern analysis. And those courses are taught, by either educators from universities or from people that don't live in the United States. So when they do bring a class to the US, it may be one class, it may have 12 seats in the class, and it may be in Southern California, or it may be in upstate New York. And so getting a seat in that class and then getting funding to travel, to that location to take that kind of coursework sometimes is challenging for agencies, because the cost to attend that class is expensive. And so the great thing about going to conferences such as Bloodstain Pattern Analysis or Crime Scene Reconstruction is you can interact with your colleagues from other countries or other parts of this country that are pursuing some advanced technology. Like a friend of both of ours, Eugene Licio, is Canadian, and he is doing amazing stuff with scan data and all different platforms of scanners, but focusing on spatter patterns and cast-off patterns. And so he's got students that are doing research, that he is a part of, and so they are really putting out some valuable research that correlates to actual scene work. There's kind of two parts to research, right? There's the academic research that, talks about droplets in flight, and while that stuff is important, sometimes that stuff doesn't translate into going to the crime scene and being able to extrapolate data that you can then testify to. And so what Eugene is doing is absolutely paramount to crime scene work and understanding what data you can derive from those types of patterns, and then how to make it, how to have the scientific basis to back up your analysis.
So now he's developing software for this, or he's just putting in the data into, I guess, Excel? And I mean, what is he doing with the current data he's
So
collecting?
he is creating mechanisms that create different types of patterns, so like cast-off patterns or spatter patterns, and then using the scan data and using plug-in software that measures the ellipse of the bloodstains, and then creates a 3D model of those patterns, and then deriving data from those patterns, from that scan data. So like some recent papers that he's published are on like a cast-off pattern, and can we identify where the mechanism was located in a three-dimensional space. So say you've got an offender, he is yielding a baseball bat, he is creating these cast-off patterns by bludgeoning a victim. Can we, using droplets and using the ellipses, their area of origin, or can we develop an area of origin based on that? Historically, cast-off patterns really didn't yield us an area of origin, and I think Eugene's really getting close to being able to visualize where a person was standing at the time they were.
So what else do you think he has to do? Is there just more research to be done, more data to collect that it meets, like, happens so often? Or, I mean, what would you say has to be done before he can say, yes, this works, right?
He did a presentation at the Crime Scene Reconstruction Conference, and when you start looking at all of this modeling that he's doing, I think that there is a lot that we can do with cast-off patterns, and you can really start to visualize where the axis is. I really think that he's done an exceptional job at kind of diving into that and having enough test patterns that, and as the scan data, as we really learn what our scanners can do, and, the technology that goes into, like the,
As far as mapping it out and such?
yeah, like the packages that go into on how we capture, individual patterns, and then being able to put that into a 3D modeling program. I think that that's really come a long way, even in just the time that, Montgomery County started using a scanner.
So now is he using different scanners? He's in, I mean, the two common ones I always hear is Leica and Faro,
Sure,
right?
yep. And so he works a lot with the Faro, and, because it's easy for him to take that on the road, and so he travels with it, and then that's what we use in a classroom setting. So that's going kind of back to your original question. That's another benefit of attending these conferences, because people like Eugene, travel with their scanner, and so when you don't just sit in a presentation or in a 4-hour workshop and just listen to how he came up with his data. He actually has a scanner there. You create a pattern, you use a scanner, and then you use the computer software to build your own product. So it's very much a hands-on opportunity for people that may not have the opportunity to travel, to these dedicated classes.
So what do you think is sort of the defining moment of what your research has done to be accepted? Is it the peer group? Is it like a BPA saying that this is accepted, that we all agree that you've done enough work on this? Or is it that a court has accepted? Is it a combination of both? I mean, what really is that defining, like, okay, we can use this now?
So we talked last time that I was here a lot about the Texas Forensic Science Commission and what they were doing. And so it, as the court cases are challenged, as specific forensic disciplines are challenged, then that basically puts those, like say for Bloodstain, right? Bloodstain came under the Texas Forensic Science Commission's microscope back in 2016, 2017. And so they really started looking at, okay, who's testifying to it? What training and education do they have? What is their foundation? What should be required for someone to be able to testify to this discipline? And as we look at that, and as we kind of really start to break that down on, okay, can anyone go to a class and get a certificate? Is that what is acceptable? No, it's not, right? I mean, sitting in a class, just like we have seen, in this career that, people can read a book and take a test and get a certificate. But
Not actually practice it, not actually go to scenes.
Correct, and that doesn't mean that they're proficient in their craft. They're just good at reading books and taking tests. But it doesn't mean that they can then demonstrate how to properly
apply that knowledge.
Apply it. And so those are types of things that, currently we are working to establish, okay, yes, the classroom foundation is important. You have to have the classroom knowledge, you have to have the hands-on knowledge, you have to have practical application, okay? But there's also other things that kind of are required. You have to have an understanding of statistics, you have to have an understanding of physics when dealing with bloodstain. You have to know how blood behaves on different surfaces, right? Non-porous surfaces, porous surfaces, how it behaves on fabric. So those are all things that we are looking to standardize to say, okay, this is what we expect you to have in order to testify in a Texas court.
So speaking of like the Canadian research that's going on for the cast-off, is that something that he would then have to present before some type of forensic science commission to be accepted? Or it sort of, when you're doing something new, I guess, like I was saying, that at what point or what would be the steps for him to have his study validated, I guess?
Sure. So he has, a lot of his stuff has been published in widely accepted peer review publications, like through the American Academy of Forensic Science, through the IAI, through the IABPA. So, the International Association for Identification, which you mentioned earlier in your announcements, through the International Association of Bloodstain Pattern Analysts, through the American Academy, they have a Journal of Forensic Science. And so those are all peer-reviewed publications by subject matter experts that has a pretty rigorous vetting process. And so, it's published work that an analyst could use to defend their analysis.
So now, one of the presentations that you did at the last conference was, I guess, the certification process, the accreditation process. I know you had just gone through that here in Montgomery County. So I guess in general, what's the basic requirements or things like that? I don't know another way to put it, but if I'm sitting in an agency right now, okay, and I say, hey, I would like to have this accreditation, what do I need to have before I even start that process, or can any agency do that? What sort of needs to be in place for that?
Sure. So, you can, currently at Montgomery County, myself and my Sergeant Leslie McCauley, who is a frequent guest on your program, are under the Montgomery County Bloodstain Accreditation, under the accreditation. That is something where you develop a standard operating procedure, and that's not something that you just have to sit down and create. There are guidelines that are set forth by the Bloodstain Subcommittee of the OSAC, which is the Organization of Scientific Area Committees, and it kind of gives you a guideline of what your SOP should look like. I leaned on my colleagues who had established SOPs and asked if I could look at theirs. And that's one thing that I found with, especially with bloodstain people is, everyone's willing to help everybody else. And so I got a couple SOPs that I was able to look at, and then I developed Montgomery County's SOP based on how we do the things that we do, staying within the guidelines set forth by the Bloodstain OSAC group. And then I developed a training manual, and again, that was, I took a lot of my colleagues' programs on how they were training, and then thought about what I wish that kind of the steps that I wish that someone would have put me through, instead of trying to navigate, on my own way.
Right.
And so I built a training program. So those are two components that you have to have in place. There are really two accrediting bodies. ANAB is one, A2LA is another one, and so they follow the international standards. So, in international standards or accreditation, it's not just for forensics, right? Forensics is such a small part of accreditation.
Right.
It's a huge, construction companies, like people building skyscrapers, people that are, in the food industry, right? They are all accredited to, build buildings and build bridges and build stuff. And so forensics is really, really small, a small component of what they do. But the standards are laid out that, says how you're going to deal with your quality management, how you're going to deal with, certain, if there is a corrective action, like if I went out to a scene and used the wrong chemical, right, and that wasn't a chemical designed for bloodstain, okay, then that could be a corrective action, right? It's like, hey, you used the wrong chemical. And, and then it's like, okay, how are we going to deal with that? Do we have to pull you off casework and send you back to training? And, and all of that is documented. And so then when you have all of that in place, then you reach out to this accrediting body, and then they find someone that is familiar or a subject matter expert in your discipline. And our assessor came from California, from the DOJ,
Okay.
and they came in and he looked at all of our standards and then looked at all of our work and made sure that what we have written, what we say we do, but then make sure that we're actually doing what we say. And we're doing it the way that we say we're going to do it.
So how long is the process? I mean, obviously, the process of you creating your own policies and it's very common, I think, in not just police work, I think in pretty much any industry, to network with other entities that do the same thing and say, hey, do you have a policy on this? You have a policy on that? And then sort of tweak it to meet your needs. And I think that's very common. But so obviously writing the SOP and putting those things in place, that sort of depends on how long that takes you. But once you have that, then what's sort of the time frame, the process of them sending someone in, them overlooking at what you're doing?
So, and that is all going to be, we were very blessed. I've been at Montgomery County for 22 years. And I'm amazed at the support that we have had, and that we continue to have. I've been in the crime lab now over 18 years. And, I've talked to other crime scene investigators and other, both big and small. And it seems like the more people that we talk to, the more I realized how richly blessed we are to be not only, in Texas, but in Montgomery County, but to work for an agency like the Sheriff's Office that, has
Gives you the support you need.
always given us abundance of support, and that goes from, the top down. And so I had the blessing of, my entire chain to expedite the accreditation process in Bloodstain. I was able to kind of put my, other than my call-out schedule, but put my casework aside to focus on pursuing accreditation. And it took us right at like 11 and a half months from, and we already had a working SOP. So that wasn't even, that was just kind of tweaking the SOP, coming up with a training manual, making sure that all of that coincided with our quality manual, coming up with the proper forms that we were needed, that the accreditation standard said we had to have to deal with some of these issues. And so it was about 11 and a half months.
So now when they come in for their first review, obviously, I imagine no one just hits it out of the ballpark, first thing. They have a couple things they tell you that could be better, or you could tweak or whatever. Is there like a time frame that they come in and say, hey, we'll be back in a week, we'll be back in 6 months? What do they sort of do on that?
So I'm not sure, because we actually did exceed all of our.
You met all the stuff when it came in?
Yep. And so we knew after 3 days that so the assessment lasted 3 days, but we knew at the conclusion of our 3 days that they did not find any issues that needed to be addressed.
So is that it at that point, that poof, you're accredited, or is there like they have to go back and take what they've found to others, or how does that work?
Sure. So the assessors then, made their final report. That report was submitted to the accrediting body, so ANAB, and then it takes about, I think it took us about 5 weeks to get our official,
Notice or certification or accreditation?
Yep. And then they notify the Texas Forensic Science Commission that we have been accredited in bloodstain pattern analysis, and then we send all of our documents to the Forensic Science Commission.
So what's the follow-up from that? Obviously, they don't let you just take off and run and never check on you again.
Sure. So they for the next 4 years, they are going to come and they are going to look at to make sure we're still following the standards. They're going to look at my casework and make sure that it's going through all the the peer review process, the administrative review process, that it's being, that we are storing it, on our server, all of those things, and so they're going to come back and they're going to make sure that everything that we did in, 2018, that we still were doing it in 2019, that we're still going to be doing it, in 2020. And then after them coming every year for 4 years, then they come every other year.
So now, obviously things change. I mean, in Bloodstain, I mean, obviously that's why you have the different organizations and such. So as things change, who changes those standards? Is it the OSEC? Is it the Texas Forensic Commission that says, hey, you now need to do this, or you need to change it to this, and then you would update to maintain your accreditation?
So the OSAC is going to be the best resource for changing standards or changing best practices. It is encouraged by the Forensic Science Commission to follow OSAC standards. Most people that in Texas, most people that come from an accredited agency, regardless of what discipline it's in, whether it's DNA, firearms, crime scene, bloodstain, there are people that are plugged in to those respective OSAC groups. So, like for me, I am a member of the Bloodstain subcommittee with OSAC. So I'm there working on how we do things, okay?
Right.
So then it's really easy for me to come back and say, okay, hey, we're gonna, instead of using this term, now we're gonna use this term, or we're gonna switch out our terminology, or, we're going to, if there is an uncertainty of measurement, on the scan data, we're gonna address that. So that's easy to come back and go, hey, we need to, I get with my quality team and say, hey, we need to make an update to the Bloodstain SOP, and so then that is documented that those changes were made, and then that goes through the review process so that when the accrediting body comes back, right, they can see these are the changes that we made to our manual. This is why we made them. Here is the updated change.
So I know most accreditations cost money. Okay?
Sure.
So do you know the cost associated with the accreditation y'all got, and what the yearly, or I guess quarterly, those type of costs associated?
I know that it comes as far as the, what we wrote the check for. I don't, and I've never inquired.
Right.
I do know that, to accredit 5 bloodstain pattern analysts at an agency, it comes with a price tag. If that's the only thing they're coming there to accredit,
Right.
and you've got 5 analysts, it runs about $40,000.
Okay. And then, now that's the initial assessment. Do you know
Yes.
any follow-up cost to that?
Sure. So I know that it's like a maintenance contract.
Right, right.
That, and I think that is substantially less, around $5,000 or less.
Right. That's very common with any type of accreditation. There's the initial setup cost, and then there's the follow-up, and I think it's pretty much standard of anything with computer software. We always pay like this big chunk up front.
Yep.
And then the maintenance cost, which slowly piles up, but it's not as much.
Sure. Well, and we went through the same thing with our scanner, right? The scanner, was expensive, right? Because of the technology that, I think we got our scanner in 2007, 2008, I think.
Yep.
And it was a pretty hefty
Yeah, that's right.
upfront cost.
It was like $270,000 for everything up front, and it was still, I won't say very new. I know them and Faro were still sort of the two dogs in the fight.
Sure.
And I know it's progressed massively since then. I don't know if the cost has gone down or not, but
It has. I mean, I think that now they have, like the Faro scanner was quite a bit smaller than the
Right.
big Leica, the
the 360 thing.
yeah, the Leica machine. It's heavy and it's big, and the Faro machine's always been a little bit more lightweight and not so cumbersome. What you give up with going, and it's kind of like the Ford and Chevy debate, right? Like the people that are diehard Ford people
Right.
have,
They're just going to follow that no matter
all
what,
the
right?
reasons why Ford is better, and then you've got the Chevrolet people that go, well, no, and so I think the same happens with Leica and Faro, that Leica says that they are better on this front, where Faro counters that with why they might be better than Leica. So, I think both are phenomenal products. They both do exactly what
They're intended to
anyone
do,
would need
right.
them to do, especially when it comes to, mapping crime scenes and, I think that over 300, 300 feet or 100 yards, that the Leica is accurate to, like a fraction, like a couple millimeters,
Right.
which isn't even the size of a pencil eraser.
Right.
That is better than you're ever going to do with a tape measure, or trying to roll it with the
Right.
measurement wheel. So its precision is amazing. And that's, precision in 360 degrees. And so, I think that both products are absolutely incredible.
So speaking of both those products, I know we use both in the crime scene reconstruction, right? So sort of to a point switching gears, the other conference, which was very recent, you had in March in Reno, right on the tail end of You Should Not Be Traveling Anywhere trip.
Sure.
And so what's happening in crime scene reconstruction? What's the big news out of that conference?
Man, so that was a phenomenal conference. Probably the best content of any conference I've been to in 18 and a half years. The coordinators did a phenomenal job at putting together a really nice lineup. The focus this year really kind of, the underlying kind of message or the underlying focus was about trauma, like post-traumatic, not PTSD per se, but like mental health in...
So emotional impact to the investigator?
Yep.
Okay.
And on, doing this kind of work where, for example, for me, 18 and a half years of responding to violent death scenes, where you are, in those scenes for extended amounts of time. And, from that, you come back to the office, you log your evidence, you put your pictures in, and then you go to your next violent death scene. And so there was a lot of presentations on, just managing your emotional health and making sure that after you have given a career
Right.
to a community or an agency, that when you finally do reach the day that you can retire, that you're emotionally healthy to then enjoy your retirement, and that you don't become reclusive or an alcoholic or, start battling some of this stress that you have had to deal with over a prolonged period of time. And so there were a lot of people that spoke about, that had different presentations on, like a representative from the FBI out of the Denver field office, as well as the agent with the Colorado Bureau of Investigations, CBI. They were two of the folks that did the Chris Watts case, which is the husband that killed his wife and two young daughters, and then took them out to the oil field. And so they talked about that investigation, on how they handled interviewing Chris Watts. They showed their interview techniques, which is something that I really am not familiar with at all, because we have you guys that handle that aspect. So it was interesting to me to see that, but more importantly, they spoke about how it affected them personally and how they dealt with, after that 8 days that they worked that case almost nonstop, that now it's like, okay, he's in jail, the investigation is done, now we have to go home and, with our wife and our kids, and we have to function, and we have to and you sit there and you lament, and it's not like you can just put that stuff on the shelf and go, okay, next chapter. That's baggage, right? It's like, it's your backpack that you have all of these cases and all of these
And
images in.
I think it's a very common topic right now. I mean, not just in crime scene and law enforcement in general, just the things that we see, the things we do, the stresses that we get put under over a extended period of time. And the one thing I've always found interesting, I guess, about that and the work we've done, I know we've had many scenes together, that what I've found is there's certain scenes we'll go to that as a detective investigator that it may bother me and it may not bother you. And then we go to a different scene and there's something about that one that bothers you. It doesn't bother me. And I don't want to blow it off as far as saying it doesn't bother you, right? I mean, seeing some of the things we see, yes, it's disturbing, it's upsetting, it's not normal, and you sort of accept that going into this line of work, right? But there's others that, I mean, truly bother you. And I mean, I know of a certain case with you that you have really been impacted by and had to deal with and stuff, and same with me along the way. And I think one of the biggest support that we find, and luckily we have those great relationships and friendships to actually still have those conversations, right? That I know there's many times that you just have to take a break from what you're doing and go sit in someone's office and go have that conversation of, hey, this really bothered me. And in the past, I think that was sort of looked at as like a weakness, like, well, maybe you shouldn't do this anymore.
Sure.
It's like, well, no, in general, I love my job, but this one really got to me, and I need to tell someone about that. And sometimes it's just talking to your peers that sort of helps with that, and sometimes it requires you to take that a little bit further. And I think that I've seen over the past probably 5 years a switch to where that's more accepted. And I see that at a lot of conferences or classes or even specific classes talking about just PTSD and officers, investigators, that type of thing. So I think it's becoming more common.
Well, and I think, and like what you said, right? When we first got into this, it was like, how hard can you be? And how hard charging can you be? How hard can you go? And then if you were always afraid that if you showed any kind of weakness, you were going to be taken away from what you dearly loved, right? Because the whole reason that we still do what we do is because we, like for me, I still believe what I do makes a difference. And
Right.
there's so many, different divisions that, sometimes I hear it's like, we're not making a difference. We're not making a difference here. We're not ever going to cure people driving drunk, right? Like, it doesn't matter how much public service announcements we put out, people still are going to drink and get behind the wheel. And so then that frustrates people because it's like, golly, what else could we do, right? And so I still feel like with, the opportunities I've been given, that I can go out there and I can make a difference and I can be a voice for the victims. And that comes at a cost, right? Because it's like, you then continue to see some stuff that normal people should not have to see.
Right.
And, it's like, and you're right, just in the last 5 years, people are now, we are more aware to look at our coworkers and go, hey, are you okay? Like you are not behaving how I would expect you to behave. Like now it's Wednesday, we had a bad scene last week, but now you are withdrawing, or you are really edgy, or why are you snapping? Why are you just very short? What's happening with you, right? And being a good teammate and being a good, coworker and being, compassionate and going, hey, let's shut the door, let's sit down and talk, and sometimes like what you said, all it takes is for, someone to notice, like sometimes that's the biggest thing is, hey, wow, someone actually notices that I'm not okay. Or sometimes just talking to your coworker is not enough, right? And then it's like, hey, I appreciate you talking to me, but,
Yeah, we got to get you a little bit further.
yeah,
Someone
and
else
you know
talk to
what? I'll go with you. I'll go with you. I'll sit in the waiting room and and so that's what was amazing about seeing in that presentation about Chris Watts is because one agent helped another agent and said, you know what? I made you an appointment. I'm driving you to it because you are not okay. And I can see it and everyone around you can see it, even if you can't see it. And, so I think that we, like the old salty detectives, okay?
Right. Nothing bothers me.
Nothing
Right.
bothers me, right? Like, we are eventually going to fix that where, I think that it will become where we're the old salties and the people that come after us, we can help them manage, that, this,
More accepting of the trauma
It
and
is.
the need of what's happening.
and having administrators who also encourage good mental health, right? Because my daughter, she needs, when I reach retirement, I don't want her to go, oh, no, let me call my mom and see where she's at because, she might be
On the edge again.
on the edge, right? And so she deserves, she has had to sacrifice for her 12 years dealing with a mom who gets called out in the middle of the night, who has to leave birthday parties, has to leave during opening presents on Christmas morning because the phone rings. And so she has also sacrificed. So she deserves to have the best mom, the most mentally healthy mom when, I get to retire and, not be afraid to leave, her kids with grandma because she doesn't know what to expect from grandma.
Right, and we've always joked about that. Our kids have not had a normal childhood. It's just accepting. I always tell the story of me being called out one time, and my daughter asked me, says, well, Dad, where are you going? I said, I got to go dig up a dead body. She's like, can I come help? No, you can't come help. You got to stay home.
Right.
But, so speaking of you making a change, making a difference, so you also just recently got back from Vietnam, yes?
I
So-
did get back from Vietnam.
So how did you end up in Vietnam, and what exactly were you doing there helping? Was it their police force? Do they separate? Do they have like a separate police force versus federal, or how's that work?
So they
in
do.
Vietnam?
They have so I was in Hanoi, which is northern. So even though Vietnam is now one country, there's still a north and a south. And so Hanoi is in the northern part of Vietnam, where Saigon, which is now Ho Chi Minh City, is in southern Vietnam. But Hanoi is their capital of the country. And so I had the opportunity to teach a 3-day crime scene processing course for the Vietnamese Ministry of Securities, which is their national police.
Okay, so that'd be like the equivalent of our FBI type of thing?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And so now they still have local police forces, or that is their police force?
So Hanoi has a city police, so the Hanoi Police Department. And then, Hanoi, the city of Hanoi has about 15 million people in the city.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, it's huge. Which surprisingly, they have zero traffic issues because most people ride scooters. And
So we should just go to scooters.
well,
That's-
it made me think that the traffic jams from Conroe to Houston, which, you could make that trip in like 25 minutes.
Right.
But if you try to go at 7 a.m. to Houston, it's going to take you an hour and a half. They are able to move a lot of people very quickly because you have people on scooters, and it may be, 2 people, they're doubled up. I saw a guy on a scooter transporting like the salon chair with the sink. So the sink and the recliner that was on the back of his scooter, and he was transporting that. I saw a lady, she had 3 ladders, like full, 10-foot ladders on each side of the scooter, and she was going somewhere transporting these ladders. I saw 3 huge boxes, like toilet paper boxes, and they were stacked up and bungee corded down. And those
You
were.
may have a solution for mass transit. That's-
And it works. They drive the scooters in the rain, and I'm thinking, if you put all of these people into like a SUV, right? So you have one person in an SUV and one person in an SUV, you have Houston traffic.
Right.
You put all of these people on a scooter, you're in Houston in 20 minutes.
So now I know you do not speak Vietnamese, so how'd that end up for you?
So I don't speak Vietnamese, and it's not something that you really just go on to, Duolingo and start.
Google Translate or any of those?
Yeah, and Google Translate has a little difficulty sometimes. with converting English to Vietnamese. I know that one of my students had sent me a message and said something about my flight, but it came as my flying ship.
Okay.
So I mean, I understood what he was talking about, but they did a really good job they understand and speak English pretty good, actually, for really, not leaving their country. They don't have a lot of opportunity to travel outside of their country. Their economy is not very good, and so it's very expensive for them to go anywhere. So most of their training is in country, and they are fortunate when people come in to train. So things like
So what'd they get for 3 days? So what'd you cram in their heads for 3 days of training?
So they purchased 3 crime scene trucks for the ministry, similar to what we have. It was assembled in a plant in Turkey, but it's a Ford F-250, kind of like a box van.
Right.
That has a laboratory. It's got, the storage bins. It's very nice. And then they bought crime scene equipment to go in these trucks. So what they were wanting was training on the crime scene kits that they bought. Fortunately for me, we use most all of that same equipment. So like their trajectory kit that they bought, we have the exact same trajectory kit. So my training was just on the different kits that they bought, how to use those kits, how it's applicable to, like, here's this is where you use it in the scene, this is where I have found that this works most efficiently and effectively. So that's kind of how the class was laid out. Everything went through a translator, and the translator did not have a foundation in forensics.
That may be a problem.
So it was tough for her on the first day to kind of understand what I was trying to say and then how to translate that into Vietnamese. After about day 1, I realized that I had some English-speaking people that were students
They had some forensic knowledge.
that were very much had forensic knowledge. And so they kind of stepped in to kind of bridge the gap between what the translator was, and she was great. She was frustrated. I was frustrated, for the first half of the day, because I'm trying to explain, and then she's like, I don't know how to say that. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a disaster. But you know what? They were troopers. They endured it. I thought they're never going to come back. Like, they are not going to come back tomorrow. They did. They were awesome. And then, we learned how to speak to each other with, sign language, and they would let me know, just with their facial expressions on whether they were understanding it or if they were confused. And so at the end of the 3 days, it really was just amazing. We made certificates, right? So that's something that, we obviously take for granted. You go to a conference, you get a certificate.
Right.
You take a 40-hour Bloodstain class, you get a certificate. You're so excited. You pose with the instructor. They had never been given certificates for any training. And so it was...
It's like a graduation.
It was like graduating from a university. I mean, they set up this pomp and circumstance up on the stage. They came up. They had, they wanted pictures. They had a photographer that came in to take these certificate pictures, and they were very proud of their
That's awesome.
certificate.
So how many students did you have?
So there were 23 in the beginning, but that included their director and that, but 20 practitioners.
So how many are there throughout, I guess, Vietnam that would be called to do this service?
So that is something that's interesting, in that because of their government, they are not very forthcoming with any kind of information. And
Okay.
so what I found was I identified a student in the class that seemed like he was the guy that was allowed to
Give you some information.
correspond with me, and that pretty much everybody else was not allowed to interact. You know, they were very honest. They said, you know, because of who you are and where you're from,
We're not telling you a whole lot.
we're not really teammates, we're not really colleagues. Now, aside from your government and my government, on a personal side, like, we're going to be friends forever.
Right.
However, when it comes to who you are in your position and who we are in our position, that's not going to be a thing, which is very sad to me because, you know,
The missed opportunities.
well, I want to be able to, for them to come to the IABPA, right,
Right.
so that they can network, which is another thing. Yes, you know, there is networking at conferences, but it just is going to help them, you know, because they're very insulary right now, and they don't have a lot of interaction with anybody else. And so how do we know what they're doing is actually correct, and then they're not doing bad science?
Right.
You know, how do we know that the training that they're getting is actually quality training? And I'm probably not the one to be able to assess that because they're not going to share that with me. But if they could come to the conference, they could network with people that, you know, like we have a lot of people come from South Korea. We have a lot of people that come from Singapore. And so they very much could network with those folks and at least have that kind of connection to see what they're doing and the research that's coming out of those countries, and not necessarily have to interact with, you know, Americans. They could interact with other countries that are more aligned with their government. So that's my hope. My hope is that I'm going to find, or that we, the IBPA, is going to find a way to have a scholarship
Bring someone from other countries in.
to bring them over and, you know, at least give them the opportunity, because right now they don't have an opportunity to travel because of how expensive it is for them. So if that was something that we could have a scholarship for countries like Laos and Thailand and that aren't economically
Able to do those things. Right.
correct. And so I'm very hopeful that training course is not the last time that I see my new friends, because, you know, I really think that we have so much participation around the globe from a lot of other countries and a lot of other continents that it's very sad that they may not have that opportunity.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing what you did over there, and hopefully they will come around. So, as we wrap up, I just want to touch on something. It's probably been, I guess, April last year that I came up with the idea to bring this show forward, and with the help of Dick, our producer, we have made this possible. It started about in June, and now it's being listened to in 13 different countries on many podcast providers. You know, along with being broadcast here in Conroe on FM 104.5, 106.1, our Lone Star Radio. I know they still have spots available. If there's an idea for a show that you would like, you can always reach out to the studio here at LSCRS, which is Lone Star Conroe Radio Studios, lscrstudios@gmail.com. You can reach out to Dick. He can help you set that up if that's something you're looking for. If you have something that you'd like to hear on this show, or if you'd like to sponsor the show, you can contact me at dan@crimescenetoday.com. We appreciate you listening. We look forward to having you in the future.